August 2026. Good day and welcome to Akahi News. Today is Thursday the 20th of August 2026, and the news landscape is once again dominated by politics, the economy, public accountability, social concerns and developments that directly affect ordinary Nigerians. From former Vice President Atiku Abubakar declaring that the 2027 presidential election will be his final attempt, to Vice President Kashim Shettima returning from leave earlier than expected, from the continuing debate over Nigeria's finances to the strengthening Naira, from a disturbing alleged baby trafficking case in Rivers State to the celebration of Isese Day across parts of the Southwest, today's stories tell us something important. Nigeria is already deep into the political, economic and social conversations that will shape the months ahead. So, let us examine the 7 major stories, not merely by reporting what happened, but by asking the more important questions. What does each development mean? Who stands to benefit? What should Nigerians be concerned about? 1. Atiku declares, 2027 will be his final presidential contest. Let us begin with perhaps the most politically significant announcement of the day. Former Vice President and African Democratic Congress presidential candidate, Atiku Abubakar, has declared that the 2027 presidential election will be his final attempt to become Nigeria's president. He has also ruled out another presidential contest in 2031. Atiku's declaration changes the political psychology surrounding his candidacy. For years, the question surrounding Atiku has not simply been whether he could win the presidency, but how long he would continue pursuing it. Now, he has effectively placed a deadline on his ambition. That creates both an opportunity and a challenge. The opportunity is obvious. If 2027 is genuinely his final attempt, Atiku can present himself as a candidate who is fighting one last political battle rather than someone seeking an indefinite political career. He can tell Nigerians that this is not about personal ambition stretching endlessly into the future, but about what he believes he can accomplish if given the opportunity to govern. But there is another side to this story. Being the final attempt does not automatically make a candidate more electable. Nigerians will still want answers about the economy, unemployment, insecurity, corruption, electricity, education and the cost of living. And, perhaps most importantly, opposition parties will have to answer the question of whether they can build a sufficiently broad coalition capable of challenging the ruling APC. Atiku has also spoken about restoring petrol subsidy if elected. That promise will undoubtedly attract attention because Nigerians remember how painful the removal of fuel subsidy has been for household budgets. But there must be serious scrutiny here. If subsidy is restored, how much will it cost? Where will the money come from? And how will government prevent the corruption and inefficiencies historically associated with subsidy administration? Politicians cannot simply promise cheaper petrol. They must explain how the policy will be funded and sustained. And this brings us naturally to another development that makes the 2027 political environment even more interesting. Because while Atiku is talking about his final presidential battle, someone very close to the center of the present administration has just returned to the political stage. 2. Leave. Vice President Kashim Shettima has returned to Nigeria and resumed official duties 2 days earlier than expected, after a scheduled 2-week leave. Reports say he returned to Abuja on Tuesday, August 18th. Ordinarily, the return of a vice president from leave would not necessarily be a major national story. But politics has a way of making ordinary events interesting. Nigeria is moving towards the 2027 general election, and the ruling APC is already preparing for another presidential contest. Therefore, Shettima's return naturally attracts political attention. However, this is where objective journalism becomes important. We should distinguish between what is known and what is speculation. What is known is that Shettima returned earlier than the originally announced schedule. What is not established by the available reports is that his early return represents a particular political strategy, disagreement within government, or any other dramatic explanation. We should therefore resist the temptation to manufacture a political story where the facts have not established one. Nevertheless, his return comes at a politically sensitive time. The APC will have to defend the record of the Tinubu administration, while opposition parties will attempt to convince Nigerians that the government has not done enough. And this takes us directly to perhaps the biggest issue behind virtually every political argument in Nigeria: money. Because elections are about promises, but governance is about resources. And when we start talking about resources, Nigeria's budget and borrowing become unavoidable. 3. Nigeria's massive budget and the bigger question: where is the money going? There is an important clarification here. Earlier reports and discussions have circulated different figures concerning Nigeria's 2026 budget. But the figure that matters for the current discussion is that President Bola Tinubu subsequently assented to a 68.32 trillion Naira's 2026 Appropriation Act in April 2026. Now, 68.32 trillion Nairas is an enormous amount of money. But the critical question is not simply, how big is Nigeria's budget? The more important question is, what does the Nigerian citizen get in return for this enormous expenditure? A massive budget can sound impressive. But if citizens continue to struggle with electricity, transport costs, food prices, unemployment, poor healthcare, and inadequate infrastructure, then the size of the budget alone means very little to them. This is why budget implementation deserves as much attention as budget presentation. Government must be judged not merely by the amount appropriated, but by the quality of execution. How much actually reaches roads? How much improves schools? How much improves hospitals? How much creates jobs? How much supports productive businesses? And how much disappears into administrative costs, duplicated projects, inflated contracts, or expenditure that ordinary Nigerians cannot easily see? These are legitimate questions in any democracy. And speaking of money, there is another development that deserves even greater scrutiny. The federal government is facing questions over a $5 billion financing facility involving First Abu Dhabi Bank. 4. The $5 billion Abu Dhabi loan. Nigerians deserve clarity. Nigeria's finance minister and coordinating minister of the economy, Taiwo Oyedele, has rejected calls for the federal government to publish detailed information about the $5 billion financing facility involving First Abu Dhabi Bank. The government's position deserves to be heard. But Nigerians' demand for transparency also deserves to be heard. This is not simply a political argument. It is a question of public finance. Whenever government borrows billions of dollars, citizens naturally want to know, what is the money for? What are the terms? What is the interest cost? What security or collateral is involved? How will it be repaid? And what economic benefit will Nigerians receive? Government officials may argue that not every commercial detail of a financial transaction can be publicly disclosed. That may be understandable in certain circumstances. But transparency cannot simply mean, trust us. A government handling public resources must provide sufficient information to enable citizens and independent experts to understand the broad financial implications. This is especially important because Nigeria already has substantial debt obligations. Borrowing is not automatically bad. If borrowed money is invested in productive infrastructure that expands the economy and generates future revenue, it can potentially contribute to development. But borrowing to finance consumption without generating corresponding economic value can create a burden for future generations. Therefore, the debate should not be reduced to whether Nigeria should borrow. The real question is, are Nigerians getting sufficient value from the money being borrowed in their name? And while the federal government faces questions about billions of dollars, something much closer to the pocket of the average Nigerian is also attracting attention today. The Naira-dollar exchange rate. 5. The Naira and the dollar. If the Naira is stronger, why are prices still high? Nigeria's foreign exchange market continues to show a relatively stronger Naira. Reuters reported that the Naira was trading around 1,345 Nairas per dollar officially on August 20th, while street rates were considerably higher. This is important. But it raises a question ordinary Nigerians have been asking for months. If the Naira is becoming stronger, why aren't food and other prices falling at the same speed? That is a perfectly legitimate question. Influence the cost of imported goods and inputs, but prices do not automatically fall the moment the currency strengthens. Businesses may still be dealing with high transportation costs, electricity, wages, previous inventory purchased at higher exchange rates, taxes, financing costs and other operating expenses. There is also the issue of competition. If businesses can maintain high prices because consumers have limited alternatives, a stronger currency may not immediately translate into cheaper products. So Nigerians should be careful about celebrating a stronger exchange rate as if it automatically means the cost of living crisis has been solved. A stronger Naira is good news. But the ultimate test is whether that improvement reaches the household. If the exchange rate improves but a family still cannot afford food, rent, transport and school fees, then the economic recovery has not yet fully translated into improved living standards. And from economic hardship, we move to a story that is far more disturbing. It concerns children, alleged trafficking and a maternity facility in Rivers State. 6. NAPTIP seals Port Harcourt maternity over alleged baby cell. The National Agency for the Prohibition of Trafficking in Persons, NAPTIP, has sealed a maternity facility in Port Harcourt following an investigation into an alleged child trafficking operation. Reports say 3 people were arrested, while the agency alleged that the facility was connected to the sale of babies. One report put the alleged transaction involving a baby at 13.5 million Nairas. This is a deeply disturbing story. But because allegations are involved, responsible journalism requires caution. An arrest is not the same thing as a conviction. The people arrested are entitled to due process, and the allegations must be properly established through investigation and, where appropriate, prosecution. At the same time, authorities must investigate such allegations thoroughly. The sale and trafficking of children is one of the most horrifying forms of exploitation because it takes advantage of vulnerable families and turns human life into a commodity. The authorities must establish exactly what happened. Were children illegally transferred? Were documents falsified? Who was involved? Were there intermediaries? Were vulnerable mothers targeted? And, most importantly, are there other facilities or individuals involved? The investigation should not stop with the sealing of one facility if evidence points to a wider network. This story also reminds us that regulation of maternity homes and healthcare facilities is not merely bureaucratic. It can be a matter of life, dignity and child protection. And finally, after politics, money, economics and a disturbing social issue, we move to a story about culture, identity and freedom of religious and traditional expression. 7. Isis Day, Lagos, Ogun, Oyo and Osun mark a major cultural celebration. Today, Thursday, August 20th, has been declared a work-free day in several southwest states to commemorate Isis Day. Lagos, Ogun and Oyo announced the public holiday, while Osun was also reported among the states observing the day. Isis Day provides an opportunity to discuss an important dimension of Nigerian society, cultural identity and religious freedom. Nigeria is a country of extraordinary cultural diversity. Our indigenous traditions existed long before modern political boundaries and institutions. Therefore, recognizing cultural heritage does not necessarily mean forcing everyone to practice the same tradition. It can simply mean acknowledging the historical and cultural identity of a people. However, the discussion should also remain respectful. Nigeria is constitutionally diverse in religion, and citizens have different beliefs. Therefore, cultural celebrations should be approached in a way that promotes peaceful coexistence rather than religious confrontation. The real strength of Nigeria is not that everyone believes the same thing. Our strength should be our ability to live together despite our differences. The bigger picture. When we step back from these 7 stories, something interesting becomes clear. Atiku is preparing for what he describes as his final presidential race. Shettima has returned to official duties as the 2027 political environment intensifies. The government is managing a huge national budget while facing questions about borrowing and financial transparency. The Naira is showing greater stability, but ordinary Nigerians are still waiting to feel the benefits in their daily lives. Authorities are confronting alleged child trafficking. And communities across the Southwest are celebrating cultural identity. These stories may appear unrelated, but they are actually connected by one central question. What kind of Nigeria are we building? A Nigeria where political results? A Nigeria where public borrowing produces productive infrastructure rather than merely larger debt? A Nigeria where a stronger Naira eventually means greater purchasing power? A Nigeria where vulnerable children are protected from exploitation? And a Nigeria where cultural diversity can exist peacefully alongside religious diversity? These are much bigger questions than the headlines themselves. AKA HI News Final Analysis. For Atiku, declaring 2027 his final presidential contest may give his campaign a sense of urgency, but Nigerians will ultimately judge him and every other candidate by their policies, credibility and ability to solve real problems. For the Tinubu administration, the size of the national budget and the strength of some economic indicators will not be enough. Implementation and impact are what Nigerians will remember. For the federal government's $5 billion financing facility, transparency will remain essential. Government should provide as much information as legitimately possible about public financial commitments. For the Naira, a stronger exchange rate is welcome, but the real victory will come when the improvement translates into lower costs, stronger purchasing power, more jobs and better living standards. For NAPTIP, the alleged baby trafficking case requires a thorough investigation, protection of victims and proper prosecution where evidence supports criminal charges. And for Isese Day, the celebration can serve as a reminder that Nigeria's diversity is not necessarily a weakness. So, as we watch Nigeria move towards 2027, Nigerians should not simply listen to politicians. Watch the numbers. Watch the policies. Watch the implementation. Watch where public money goes. And most importantly, watch whether ordinary Nigerians are actually better off. Because at the end of the day, democracy is not merely about who wins an election. It is about whether the people who elected their leaders can feel the difference in their everyday lives. Thank you for watching, and God bless Nigeria. 7 major Nigerian stories making headlines today, Thursday the 20th of August 2026. Good day.